Everybody, I hope you're doing well. Listen, I wanted to talk a little bit this evening about the Treble Bleed mod that you can put on your guitars, which now comes with at least a lot of the newer Fenders like this American Professional. I happen to think it's a great thing to do to your guitars, depending on your situation. Let me just say a little bit about it. I hope you'll watch. You know, what's the hardest thing to do when you play guitar? That's a good question. Shredding, those sweeping arpeggios. I'm amazed. I see that. What's the guy's name? Tyler Larson and that Steve Trevorberry or whatever. Those guys are so. But what's the hardest thing to do in guitar? That's kind of an interesting question. And if you'll bear with, I remember once when I was a kid, I liked baseball a lot. That was before I discovered rock and roll. I loved baseball. And the Detroit Tigers used to have a great player. He's in the Hall of Fame. His name's Al Kaline. If you like baseball, I'm sure you've heard of Al Kaline. And someone asked Al Kaline once when I was watching him on an interview, what is the hardest thing to do in baseball? And I think everybody thought that he was going to make some, sort of comment about, hitting a curveball, maybe hitting a Phil Necro spitball. That was always tough. Or maybe hitting a 98-mile-an-hour fastball, all of which are really hard to do. Most of us could never even dream of doing it. But, he said something kind of out of the box. He said the hardest thing in baseball was to catch a fly ball when it's in the sun. And I've always remembered that because that's the kind of thing you don't notice on TV. You notice if a guy hits a home run and then, it was a curveball pitcher, a fastball pitcher, and he hits it out of the park. You notice that. A routine fly ball in the outfield that the guy catches, you don't notice. But actually, Al Kaline said that in many cases reflects one of the hardest skills in baseball, which is to take a routine fly ball that's hit into the sun and make a routine play when you've got that sun in your eyes. I guess you have to block it with your mitt, and that's hard to do. Well, to me, I think one of the hardest things in guitar is in a live band with electric guitar I'm talking about, is playing with dynamics where you have to be able to turn down and up. And so, in the studio, you kind of have controls. You might use different guitars for different parts of even the same song. Or, you might have more than one track that, you kind of get the guitar to sound one way for one guitar track. And then for a lead track, you set it up another way and play a lead solo. But live, a lot of times you have one guitar in your hand in one rig, and you might want it to sound different ways, even in the context of a song. So you might want to turn it down when the singer's singing, and then crank up a lead, and then turn it back down. And to me, that was always the hardest thing is having a good sound in an ensemble situation. I know I struggled with that a lot. I would say, I always felt like, I can take a solo or play the rhythm part, but like trying to get a good sound where maybe even within the same song you had to play solos and rhythms, I always thought that was really hard. And in my relatively limited experience playing rock and roll, I played a lot of rock and roll until I was like 22. And then I played quite a bit, and I played in a band a few years ago. And that again, but the old, and I'm thinking of my tellies, the old tellies, they didn't have treble bleed. So when you would turn down the volume, that seems like such an obvious thing. You turn down the volume and you would lose tone. See, to me, that was always messed up. Like, I didn't want to turn the tone down. I wanted to turn the volume down. I like how I sound. I just don't want to be so loud. It's not rocket science. But those Fenders that they were making really out until just a few years ago, you turn down the volume, and as soon as you went from like 10 to 9, it wasn't too bad, and 8, but man, right away you just get a horrible sound, and it would just sound kind of warbly and muddy. And I don't know about anybody else, but a lot of times you play dynamically in a live band. That's one problem with a boost pedal or like that push-pull-pot thing. You still have just kind of this binary thing. You're either at this volume or this volume or this volume. You hit a switch and you go up. But a good live player, you're using your ears and adjusting your volume as you play to the rest of the band, and that's always going to be changing in a good organic live situation. And that used to frustrate me so much. So those Japanese tellies I had were like that. I love those guitars. You can watch me play that Blue Flower one in some recent videos. But I was using that a couple years ago playing with some guys, and we were pretty good actually. But man, when the singer would sing, I would turn it down and it would sound horrible. And then, I'd crank it up, or I'd get a good sound for the singer to sing. And then, when I'd want to take a lead, I would have trouble coming up with a good lead sound. Now, pedals can take care of that some, but of course, like I said, but you want to be able to ride the volume. A good player, you kind of ride that volume, not as an effect, but you're just, adjusting your volume, maybe even in the same song. Yeah, I'm a little loud, it's almost automatic. It's like using the damper pedal and you play the piano almost. It's just part of like playing your instrument, always kind of being in sensitivity to the dynamics. So I had that Treble Bleed mod put on those two Japanese guitars, and I usually don't like the mod guitars, and those Japanese guitars I happen to think are kind of little collector's items. Just I think they're really nice. But I don't know. I can't explain the electronics at all to you. But I think he said it was some little orange drop capacitor. It wasn't a big job. I think it took him 20 minutes, and it cost me like $30 or something. But man, when I used it next, I could turn it just down to nothing and have still that really good sound. So if you take a really good cranking lead sound and then you turn it way down to 1 or 2 a lot of times, but you're not losing the qualities of the sound. That's such a nice thing to be able to do. So I always thought the Treble Bleed, if you do a mod to the guitar, that's one of the best mods I think that there is. It's a good one to have in your guitar, I think. And I don't think I'm not much for mods. I've got that one Fender Highway 1 with vintage noiseless pickups, and I do love it, and I think the pickups sound good. But, I think if all things being equal, I wouldn't have modded that guitar myself with other pickups or anything. But I think that Treble Bleed, I don't really think it's a mod. I have heard some people say don't do the Treble Bleed. That Chris Buck, he's such a good guitar player. I got to be one of the best guitar players on YouTube. Just the way he bends strings. He's a bender, like maestro at bending those things just with precision. But anyway, I've heard him say, don't get the Treble Bleed. He thinks, I guess some people think they affect your tone a little bit or something, and your tone kind of, without the Treble Bleed, your tone kind of darkens. But I don't know, I would notice it like playing country or something. As soon as I tried to turn it down, I would just sound horrible. And you'd lose that nice kind of, you don't want to be too loud, but you want to be able to rock and have a good full electric guitar sound, and I would lose that every time. And I was always fussing with my guitar. Once I put in that Treble Bleed, I still like my pedals and everything, but you could just turn the volume way down and automatically, sound good, but not lose the fullness of your sound. So I happen to think the Treble Bleed's a good mod. And I don't understand the electronics of it. I also don't have a guitar without Treble Bleed at the moment. But I do know that Fender started putting Treble Bleed in their American Professional series, and I'm pretty sure it's in the American Professional 2 series. And I think it should be the norm, because you've got a volume and a tone control. And if you turn the volume down, you want to turn the volume down. You don't want to affect the tone in any way, I'm assuming, because you've got a tone control. So to me, that should be the default. I've got a volume. When I turn the volume down, I'm making it quieter, but I'm not really trying to affect the tone. I've got other ways to do that. So I think it was a good move for Fender to put those Treble Bleed circuits in their guitars now. I really do. I'll tell you, my Highway 1, and I think like the American Performer, has something called the grease bucket circuit, and I don't really understand it. It's like you can roll off the highs or something. I don't know. It sounded kind of like Treble Bleed. I don't know if it was the same thing, but I noticed my Highway 1 doesn't seem to have that problem as much as those tellies. I think those tellies I had, those Japanese tellies, that was old school Fender electronics, and you turn down the volume and your tone just went out the window, So you pretty much, if you wanted a good sound, you pretty much had to be playing at 10. And it sounded great, but as soon as you played at 5 or something, forget it, So the Treble Bleed made a difference. It really made the volume control on those Fenders something you could use instead of just kind of a decoration on the guitar almost the way it was before. So And I don't know about Gibsons and things. I don't seem to notice it too much with my Gibson Les Paul, but I really haven't played. To me, that's the kind of thing you notice in a live situation. Like I make these videos in here, and sometimes I think they sound pretty good. I'm cranking the hell out of an amp in a little room and just playing the backing tracks, which have a nice one sound. But so I don't even know if that's a good control or a good comparison, because that's really not like playing live. I remember we used to play at this Opry, and it was like country, and they'd ask me to come and like sit in with the house band, and that's where I really noticed it. I'd want to be loud, but I didn't want to be like, but you're not playing like Ted Nugent in there, I'd want to be loud. A lot of times we're just playing off our amps. So, and I'd be loud, and I'd want a good lead sound and a country lead sound. As soon as I would turn it down, it would just sound horrible. Like, so when the singer would start, I'd lose all the nice crispness of an electric guitar. So I was really pleased to get the Treble Bleed mod. I don't think it hurt the value of the guitar in any way, shape, or form. And I think it was a good call. And I think Fender should do that on all their, or something like that on all their guitars. So when you have a volume control and you turn it down, it turns down. It's that false advertising. Otherwise, if you want to turn it down, you should turn it down. Otherwise, it's not really a volume control, is it? It's a something or another control. Well, thank you. God bless you. I hope you'll consider subscribing.